£40. That was what her father owed, and that was what she was worth. Clara Hale stood in the great hall of Ashworth Hall with rain still dripping from the hem of her dress. The housekeeper looked her up and down, slowly, the way a woman looks at a coffin before it goes into the ground. Then she said very softly, "You'll be the fourth then." Clara did not understand what that meant. Not yet. It rained the morning they came for her. Clara was in the kitchen, mending the sleeve of her father's coat when she heard the carriage. Not a farm cart, not the miller's wagon. A carriage, 4 horses, black lacquer, wheels that made no sound in the mud because the springs were too fine to rattle. Nobody in their village owned a carriage like that. Her father stood up so fast his chair fell over. "Papa, get your things, Clara." "What things? Where am I going?" He would not look at her. That was the part she remembered afterward. Not the shouting, not the carriage, not the rain. Just that her own father could not lift his eyes from the floor. "Papa, look at me." "There was a game," he said, "at the inn 3 nights ago." Clara set down the coat. "How much?" £40. She almost laughed. It was such a small number. £40 was a horse. £40 was a roof, a winter of coal, a headstone for her mother. £40 was nothing at all to the men who played cards at the inn. But they did not have £40. They did not have 4. "We'll find it," she said. "I'll take in sewing. I'll go to the Websters, they always need." "It's done, Clara." "What's done?" And then he told her. The words came out flat, like a man reading someone else's letter aloud. The dead had been bought by a great house 3 counties east, and the man who bought it had not asked for money. He had asked for her. Clara did not cry in the carriage. She sat very straight with her mother's shawl around her shoulders and her hands folded in her lap, and she watched her village disappear behind a curtain of rain. She was 22 years old. She had never been further than the market town. There was a man riding beside the carriage. Middle-aged, gray coat, a face like a closed door. He never spoke to her once in 6 hours. When they stopped to change horses, Clara leaned out of the window. "Sir, please, what is his name, the man who bought me?" The rider did not turn his head. "His Grace the Duke of Ashworth." "A duke?" Clara sat back against the seat. Her heart was beating in a strange, high way. A duke could have anyone. A duke could have the daughter of an earl, a girl with £100,000 and a name that went back to the conquest. A duke did not buy a farmer's daughter for £40. Unless he wanted something a lady's father would never allow. That was the first time Clara felt truly afraid. Ashworth Hall came out of the dark like a cliff. It was enormous. Gray stone, 60 windows, and only 3 of them lit. The gardens had been let go wild. Ivy had climbed all the way to the 2nd floor, and nobody had cut it back. The front door opened before the carriage stopped. Servants came out in 2 lines, the way they do for a wedding, 12 of them. They stood in the rain in perfect silence and they watched her climb down. Nobody said welcome. The housekeeper stepped forward. She was perhaps 60, thin as a nail, with iron-gray hair pulled back so tightly it lifted her eyebrows. "I am Mrs. Pike. Clara Hale." Mrs. Pike looked at her, up and then down. She took in the wet dress, the mended shawl, the country boots. And then she said it. "You'll be the 4th then." Clara blinked. "The 4th what?" Mrs. Pike turned and walked into the house. Behind her, one of the young maids made a small sound. It might have been a cough. It might have been a laugh. Clara turned to look, and the girl's face went white as milk, and she stared down at her own shoes and would not look up again. They gave her a room on the east side. It was bigger than her father's entire cottage. There was a fire lit and a bed with 4 carved posts and a dressing table with silver brushes on it. Somebody had already laid out a nightgown, fine linen, expensive. It fit her perfectly. Clara stood holding it for a long moment. Then she looked at the wardrobe. She opened it. It was full. Gowns, a dozen of them, silk and wool and velvet, in blues and grays and greens. And every single one was her size. Not close, not near enough to alter. Exactly her size, as though a dressmaker had spent a month with a tape measure around her waist. But no dressmaker had ever measured her. She had never been fitted for anything in her life. Clara stepped back from the wardrobe and shut it. Somebody had known her measurements before she ever came to this house. A maid brought supper on a tray at 9 o'clock. Bread, cold chicken, a bowl of soup, and a small glass of something dark and sweet-smelling. Clara had eaten nothing since dawn. She sat down, she picked up the spoon. The door opened. He did not knock. He simply opened the door and stood in it, and Clara knew at once who he was, because every candle in the room seemed to lean away from him. The Duke of Ashworth was younger than she expected, 34 perhaps, tall, dark-haired, dressed for riding though it was long past dark. There was rain on his shoulders. He had the coldest face she had ever seen on a living man. Clara stood up. She did not know whether to curtsy. She curtsied badly. "Your Grace." He did not answer. He did not even look at her, not properly, not at her face. His eyes went past her to the tray on the table. They stayed there. The silence went on so long that Clara's cheeks began to burn. "I thank you for the room, and the clothes. I don't know why you—" "Miss Hale." His voice was quiet, very level. It was the voice of a man who had said the same sentence many times before and was tired of it. "Yes, Your Grace. Listen to me carefully, because I will only say it once." Clara's hands went cold. "Do not eat anything in this house that I have not given you myself." She stared at him. I'm sorry." Not a cup of tea, not a slice of bread, not water from a jug that was standing when you came into the room. His eyes finally moved to her face, and there was nothing in them, nothing at all. "Do you understand?" "No," Clara said. "No, I don't understand at all. Why would?" The Duke walked to the table. He picked up the little glass of dark, sweet-smelling liquid. He carried it to the fire and poured it into the flames. The fire hissed and turned green, just for a moment, just long enough for Clara to see it. Then it burned orange again, as though nothing had happened. The Duke set the empty glass down on the mantelpiece. "Good night, Miss Hale." "Wait." "Good night." And he was gone. Clara did not sleep. She sat on the edge of that enormous bed with the tray untouched beside her and her mother's shawl still around her shoulders, and she went over it again and again. The gowns that fit, the maid's white face, Mrs. Pike's flat gray eyes. "You'll be the fourth, then." "The fourth what?" "The fourth guest, the fourth servant." "The fourth wife." Somewhere far below, a clock struck 1. And then Clara heard a sound she would remember for the rest of her life. Footsteps in the corridor, slow, deliberate. They came all the way to her door and stopped. Clara did not move. She did not breathe. The handle turned, once softly. Then came the scrape of iron and a heavy final click. Somebody had locked her door. From the outside. The door was unlocked in the morning. Clara tried the handle at first light, expecting resistance, already planning what she would shout through the wood. It opened without a sound. The corridor was empty. There was no key in the lock. There was no key anywhere. A maid came at 8 with hot water. She was the same girl from the night before, the one whose face had gone white in the rain. Perhaps 17. Freckles, red hands. What's your name? Betsy, miss. Betsy, who locked my door last night. The jug shook, just slightly. Water spilled onto the washstand and Betsy wiped it with her sleeve. Nobody locks doors here, miss. Someone did, I heard it. Nobody locks doors here, Betsy said again, and it came out the way children say their prayers fast, flat, without listening to the words. Then she was gone. Breakfast was served in a room the size of a church. There were 24 chairs at that table. 2 places had been set, and they had been set at opposite ends, so far apart that Clara would have to raise her voice to be heard. The Duke was already there. He was reading a letter. He did not stand when she came in. He did not say good morning. He simply folded the letter, put it in his coat, and watched a footman set a plate down in front of her. Eggs, ham, toast, a pot of tea. Clara reached for the teapot. Stop. Her hand froze. The Duke rose from his chair. He walked the entire length of that ridiculous table, and he picked up her plate, and he carried it away. Clara sat and watched, her ears burning, as the master of the house set her breakfast down on the sideboard like something a dog had touched. Then he took his own plate, his own toast, his own eggs, his own cup of tea, poured and already half drunk. He put them down in front of her. Eat that. Your Grace. Eat that. The footman by the door was staring at the wall. His face said he had seen this before, many times. Clara looked down at the plate. A man's breakfast half eaten, the toast already broken. Something in her chest went hard. No. The Duke stopped. It was the first time he had truly looked at her. Not past her, not at the tray, at her. Gray eyes, very steady, and behind them something Clara could not read at all. I beg your pardon. I said no. Clara stood up. Her knees were shaking and she hoped the tablecloth hid it. I have been in this house for 11 hours. I have been sold like a heifer, stared at like a corpse, locked in my room, and now I am to eat scraps off your plate and be grateful. So no, Your Grace. Not until somebody in this house tells me the truth. The silence went on for a long, long moment. What truth would you like? Mrs. Pike said I would be the 4th. Clara lifted her chin. The 4th what? And the Duke of Ashworth said nothing. He stood there, one hand still resting on the back of her chair, and Clara watched something move behind that cold face, something that looked, for half a second, almost like pity. Then he took his hand away. Go and look at the long gallery, he said. 2nd floor, west corridor. You'll find your answer on the wall. He walked out. Clara sat back down, alone, at a table set for 24. She was so hungry her hands hurt. She ate nothing. The house was enormous, and it was dying. Clara walked for an hour and saw perhaps a third of it. Room after room with the shutters closed and the furniture under white sheets. Dust an inch thick on the piano lid. A ballroom with the chandeliers wrapped in muslin, like great hanging cocoons. There were people in this house, she could hear them, doors closing somewhere, footsteps on a stair, but she never saw them. It was as though the servants moved through the walls to avoid her. She passed a corridor in the west wing where the doors were boarded shut. Not locked. Boarded with planks nailed across them, and the nails were rusted. At the end of it, she found the long gallery. It was a room built for looking. 60 feet of it, tall windows down one side, and on the other wall the vanes. Generations of them. Men in armor, men in wigs, men with dogs and horses and the same heavy Ashworth jaw. Their wives beside them, one to each, a matched pair, husband and wife, going back 200 years. Clara walked the whole length of it. And at the very end, where the newest paintings hung, she stopped. There was one portrait of the Duke, younger, perhaps 25, painted before whatever had happened to his face happened. and beside him in a row were 3 women. 3. Clara stood very still. The first was fair-haired, holding a little gray dog. The plate on the frame read, Margaret, Duchess of Ashworth. The second sat at a piano, half-turned, laughing at something outside the picture. Sophia, Duchess of Ashworth. The third stood alone in a garden with her hands folded in front of her, and she was not smiling at all. Isabel, Duchess of Ashworth. 3 wives. Clara's breath came out slowly. You'll be the 4th, then. She moved closer to the last one. Isabel, dark hair, gray eyes, a long neck, a straight nose, a mouth that turned down very slightly at one corner. And Clara felt the floor tilt underneath her. Because she knew that face. She saw it every morning in the glass. Not identical, Isabel had been older, finer, a lady born, but the shape of it, the coloring, the way the hair grew back from the forehead. If you passed them in the street, one after the other, you would have said sisters. Clara turned to Sophia at the piano, dark hair, gray eyes. Margaret with her little dog, fair-haired, but the face under the powder, the face. All 3 of them. All 3 of them looked like her. He chooses the same woman every time. Clara spun round. Mrs. Pike was standing in the doorway with a duster over her arm. Clara had not heard her come in. She wondered how long she had been there, watching her work it out. That's not possible. Isn't it? You've eyes in your head, girl, use them. Clara looked back at the wall, then at the housekeeper. How did they die? That's not a question for me. How did they die, Mrs. Pike? The old woman's mouth tightened. She came into the room and she stopped in front of Margaret's portrait, and she reached up and straightened the frame by 1/4 of an inch. It did not need straightening. Her Grace Margaret was sick for 11 weeks, she said. It began with her stomach. Then her hands went numb, and then her legs, and at the end she couldn't hold a cup. Doctor called it a wasting fever. And the second. Her Grace Sophia, 14 weeks, same fever. And Isabel. Mrs. Pike's hand came down from the frame. 9, she said. That one went quick. Clara's mouth was dry. Mrs. Pike, look at me. She waited until the woman did. Did he kill them? And Mrs. Pike gave her a smile, with absolutely no warmth in it whatsoever. There's a graveyard behind the chapel with 3 stones in a row, she said. You go and stand in front of them and ask them. See what they tell you. She turned to go. Wait, please. I'll tell you one thing and then I'm done. Mrs. Pike stopped in the doorway. You'll want to be kind to him, they all did. Her Grace Margaret used to read to him at night when his head ached. Her Grace Sophia gave the whole village a Christmas. Her Grace Isabel, something crossed the old woman's face and was crushed almost before it arrived. Isabel loved him like the sun rose out of him. And they were kind too, said Mrs. Pike. Kindness didn't save them, it only made it slower. The door closed behind her. Clara stayed in that gallery until the light started to go. She could not stop looking at Isabel, at her own face, 30 years older and hung on a wall in a dead woman's dress. At last she went close enough to see the brushstrokes, the tiny cracks in the varnish, and she noticed that the frame did not hang flush. The bottom corner stood out from the wall as though it had been taken down and rehung badly. Clara put her fingers behind it and pulled. It swung out on its wire. And there, on the wall behind it, hidden by the frame, where no visitor would ever see, someone had cut letters into the plaster with a knife. The strokes were deep and jagged and uneven, the work of somebody in a hurry, or somebody whose hands would not hold still. Clara had to tilt her head to read it in the failing light. M12XII. S12XII. Under those, indifferent, shakier strokes, as though carved much later and by a different hand. I-12XII. Clara stared. She had been taught her numbers in a village school by a curate with a cane, but she knew Roman letters when she saw them. XII, the 12th month. The 12th day of the 12th month. All three of them. Margaret, Sophia, Isabel, 3 women, 3 separate years, 11 weeks and 14 weeks and 9. And every one of them had died on the same day. Clara let the portrait fall back against the wall. Her heart was going so hard she felt sick with it. Footsteps in the corridor, she turned. Mrs. Pike had come back. She was carrying a lamp now, and in her other hand a folded sheet of paper, and she held it out at arm's length as though she did not much want to touch it. From His Grace, he's had it sent to the parish. What is it? The banns, said Mrs. Pike, for the wedding. Clara took the paper. She unfolded it with fingers that had gone completely numb. There were only a few lines on it. A name, hers, spelled wrong. His name and all his titles, which took up 2 of the lines by themselves. And at the bottom, the date the ceremony had been set. The 12th day of December. Clara looked up. Mrs. Pike, what's today's date? And the old woman held her lamp a little higher, and she looked at Clara with something that was almost like sorrow. The 19th of November, my girl, she said. You've 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Clara counted them out on her fingers that night, sitting on the floor in front of the fire, because the bed was too soft and too wide, and too much like something laid out for a body. 21 days until the 12th of December. The day Margaret died, the day Sophia died, the day Isabel died. The day she was to be married. She thought about running. She thought about it seriously, the way you think about a thing you have already decided you will do. There was a road. There were villages. She was young and strong, and she had walked to market and back 100 times. And then she thought about the money. £40 had been paid, not lent, paid. If she ran, that debt did not disappear. It went back to a man in a cottage 3 counties west who could not raise £4, let alone 40. They would take the roof. They would take the land. And then they would take her father to the debtor's prison at Marshalsea, and men her father's age did not come out of Marshalsea. Clara pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes. He had sold her. He had not looked at her. He had let her get into that carriage in the rain. And she still could not do it to him. That is the trap, she thought. That is exactly why he chose a girl like me. Somewhere below, the clock struck 2. She stopped counting and started thinking instead. The next morning she began to work. Not openly. Clara was a farmer's daughter, and she had learned young that the way to find things out in a village was never to ask a question directly. You asked about the weather. You asked about somebody's mother's knee. You let the silence sit and people filled it. So she began in the kitchens. She went down at 6 before the house was up, and she rolled her sleeves and she started scrubbing the great deal table without being asked. The cook, a wide, red woman named Mrs. Fenn, nearly dropped a ham. Miss, you can't be down here." "Why not?" "Because you'll be," Mrs. Fenn floundered. "It isn't fitting. I've scrubbed a table every day of my life. If I sit upstairs another morning doing nothing at all, I shall start screaming and never stop." Clara kept scrubbing. "You may throw me out if you like, but I should warn you I am very difficult to move." There was a pause. Then a snort of laughter from the scullery, quickly muffled. Mrs. Fenn put down the ham. "Well," she said, "you're not like the others, and that's a fact." Clara did not look up from the table. What were the others like? And that was how it began. It took 4 days. She learned that Margaret had been the daughter of a marquis and had brought £40,000 with her. She learned that Sophia had played the piano so beautifully that the servants used to sit on the back stairs to listen. She learned that Isabel had been married in June and buried before Christmas. She learned that the Duke had not slept upstairs in 6 years, that he kept a room off the library with a camp bed in it, like a soldier. She learned that the boarded corridor in the West Wing was where the 3 duchesses had been nursed, and that His Grace had ordered it closed the day after Isabel's funeral, and had done the nailing himself, at 4 in the morning alone, so that half the house woke to the sound of it. And she learned one more thing. It came from Betsy, on the 4th day in the linen room, and it came out sideways the way the important things always do. You'll want to be careful of the 12th, miss. Clara went very still, a folded sheet in her hands. Why the 12th? That's the day the doctor comes to settle the accounts, quarter day for him. He always comes on the 12th of December. Betsy shook out a pillowcase. Been coming 20 years, longer than any of us. Betsy, Clara set the sheet down, was the doctor in the house when the duchesses died. Betsy looked up, and Clara watched her understand the question, watched the whole shape of it arrive behind that young, freckled, frightened face. He was in the house all 3 times, Betsy whispered. He sat up with them himself. He wouldn't let the nurses do it. He said the danger hours were the night ones. The linen room was very quiet. What's his name? Merrick, said Betsy. Dr. Merrick. He came on the 9th day. Clara was in the yellow drawing room when she heard the gig on the gravel, the only room she had found where the shutters still opened, and she got to the window in time to see him climb down. A small, round, comfortable man of about 60, silver hair, a good coat, well brushed but not new. He shook the rain off his hat and said something to the groom that made the groom laugh out loud. Clara had never seen anybody make a servant in this house laugh. He was announced 10 minutes later. He came in with both hands out, beaming, as though she were a niece he had not seen since Easter. Miss Hale, at last, forgive me, I have been in Norfolk with a very tiresome bishop who will insist he is dying and will insist on being wrong. He took her hand and patted it. His own were warm and dry. Merrick, physician to this house since before you were born, and I am afraid I have quite scandalously neglected you. Clara found herself smiling before she could stop it. That was the first thing she noticed about Dr. Merrick. He was lovely. You're very kind, sir. I am nothing of the sort, I am merely nosy. It is the same thing in a doctor. He sat down without being asked and looked at her with his head on one side. Now, how are you sleeping? Badly. Eating. Clara hesitated for half a second. Badly. His face changed, not much, just a small softening at the edges. I thought as much. You've come a long way from home, you've a great deal in front of you, and this house is not what one would call cheerful. I have seen it 3 times before, and I never learned to like it. And there it was, handed to her gently without her having to ask a single question. Clara made herself breathe. You attended them, she said, the duchesses. I did. Dr. Merrick's hands folded in his lap. All 3. And I will tell you honestly, Miss Hale, because I think you have been told a great many things in whispers already, and whispers are worse than plain speech. I could not save any of them, and I do not know why. What did they die of? I don't know. Clara blinked. She had expected a word, fever, consumption, decline, something with a shape to it. You don't know. I do not. He said it steadily, and his eyes did not leave hers. I have 31 years of practice and a diploma from Edinburgh, and I sat by 3 young women in this house and watched them go, and I could not name it then, and I cannot name it now. It is the great failure of my life. He gave a small, tired smile. You may imagine how welcome I made myself at the inquests. There were inquests. For the 3rd one, yes. There is always talk, you know, 3 wives. He waved a hand as though brushing away a fly. "The coroner found nothing whatever, but talk does not care what coroners find. You have heard it, I don't doubt, in the kitchens." Clara said nothing. "Quite," said Dr. Merrick. "Well, I shall tell you what I told the coroner, and then I shall stop, because I am not paid to gossip and I do it far too much as it is." He leaned forward slightly. "I have known Nathaniel Vane since he was 9 years old and had the measles. He is the coldest, most impossible, most badly mannered man I have ever met in my life. And when Isabel died, I found him in the stable at 3 in the morning with a pistol in his hand, and it took me an hour to talk it out of him." The room went very still. "He was not going to shoot anybody, Miss Hale," Merrick said quietly. "You understand me." Clara sat down slowly on the edge of a chair. "Yes," she said, "I understand you." They talked for an hour. It was the easiest hour Clara had spent since she came. He asked about her village. He knew the market town, he had a cousin near it. He was funny about the bishop in Norfolk. He listened when she spoke, actually listened with his whole round face, and when she said something sharp he laughed out loud and slapped his knee. She thought, "This is the first friend I have made here." And then, when he stood to go, he reached into his bag. "Now, before I forget myself entirely," he set a small bottle on the table. "Bride's tonic, iron and gentian and a few dull things. It is not medicine so much as it is common sense. You are thin, you are not sleeping, and you have a wedding in a fortnight. A spoonful at night. It tastes revolting, and that is how you know it is doing you good." The bottle was dark green glass, corked, about the length of Clara's hand. She looked at it. "Did you give this to them?" "To whom, my dear?" "The duchesses." "Of course." Dr. Merrick fastened his bag. "I give it to every bride I attend and half the mothers in 3 parishes. Miss Hale," he stopped, and his kind face did something complicated. "I know what you are asking me, and I want you to hear the answer properly. If there were anything in this house that had harmed those women, I would have found it. It is the thing I have thought about every day for 6 years. There is nothing here but bad luck and a bad name. And the bad name is doing more damage now than the bad luck ever did." He put his hat on. "Take the tonic, eat your dinner, and for the love of God, open a window in this mausoleum." He was gone in a swirl of good humor, and Clara heard the groom laughing again outside. She sat alone, with the little green bottle in front of her for a long time. Then she picked it up and pulled the cork and lifted it to her nose. It smelled of iron and bitter herbs and something faintly sweet underneath. Nothing else. She thought about the Duke pouring her glass into the fire. She thought about the flame going green, just for a second, and how she had not been able to swear to it afterwards. How she had lain awake wondering whether a tired, frightened girl had simply seen what she was primed to see. Clara found a spoon. She poured it out. Her hand was steady. She looked at it for the space of 3 heartbeats. And she thought, "I have been in this house 11 days and I have not eaten one full meal, and I am so tired I cannot think straight, and this man is the only person in 50 miles who has been kind to me." She raised the spoon. The door slammed open, so hard it cracked against the wall. Mrs. Pike crossed that room faster than Clara would have believed a woman of 60 could move. She did not speak. She struck the spoon out of Clara's hand, struck it, the way you knock a knife from a child, and it went spinning across the carpet. Then she took the bottle. "Mrs. Pike." The old woman threw it into the fire. The glass cracked. The fire caught it, and for one long moment the whole hearth went up in a great soundless sheet of green, green like nothing in nature, green like the sea in a storm, lighting the ceiling, lighting the walls, lighting Mrs. Pike's face from below. Clara stood up so fast her chair went over. The flame died. The fire burned orange. The room smelled of burnt sugar and something underneath it, sharp and metallic, that caught in the back of the throat. Mrs. Pike stood staring into the grate with her fists closed. "They all drank it," she said. Clara could not make a sound. "Every one of them. Margaret took it because she was told to. Sophia took it because it was easier than arguing." The old woman's voice had gone strange and thin. "And Isabel took it out of my own hand because I carried the tray up, because I was told it would do her good, and I stood there and I watched her drink it, and I said, there now, that's better." She turned around. There were tears standing in her eyes, and her face was absolutely furious. And Clara understood, finally, why this woman had hated her from the moment she stepped out of the carriage. She had not been hating Clara. She had been looking at a fourth one. "Mrs. Pike, what is in it?" "I don't know." You knew, and you said nothing for 6 years." "I knew nothing." It came out as a shout, and it rang off the walls of that empty room. "I knew 3 women drank a tonic and 3 women died. That's not knowing, that's an old woman's fancy, and who was I to take it to? The magistrate, the doctor." She dragged her sleeve across her face. "I went to His Grace, 4 years ago. I stood in that library and I told him what I thought." "And what did he say?" "He said, I know." Clara's blood went to ice. "He said, I know, Mrs. Pike, and if you say one word of it aloud in this house, you will be dead inside a month, and so will I." The housekeeper's mouth twisted. And then he stopped eating at his own table. 6 years I've watched that man carve his own meat and drink from his own bottle and lock his door at night like a debtor. 6 years. Clara was already moving. "Where is he?" "Girl, where is he?" "The library, but he won't." Clara was through the door. He was at the desk with a ledger open in front of him and a single candle burning, though it was only 4 in the afternoon, because the shutters in that room had not been opened in years. He looked up as the door banged. "Miss Hale." "You knew." He put down the pen. "You knew what it was, and you let him walk into this house and hand it to me with his own hands, and you said nothing." Clara was shaking. She could hear her own voice, and it did not sound like her. 3 weeks I've been here. You watched me talk to that man. You watched him take my hand and pat it like an uncle. What did you drink?" "I didn't." She stopped me. Something went out of him. She saw it happen. His shoulders came down 1/2 an inch, and his hand went flat on the desk. "Good," he said. Don't you dare." She came right up to the desk. 3 women are buried behind your chapel. You knew what was killing them. You could have stopped it. You could have thrown him out of this house. You could have gone to a magistrate. You could have written one letter. To whom? To anybody. "Miss Hale, I am a man with 3 dead wives." The Duke's voice did not rise. That was somehow the worst of it. "I have no proof. I have never had any proof. There is nothing in that bottle that any physician in England can find. I have had it tested twice in London at my own expense under a false name, and both men wrote back and told me it was iron and gentian." He looked up at her. "If I go to the magistrate, do you know what happens? A duke accuses the respectable doctor who buried his 3 wives. And the county says, of course he does. And then I hang, and the whole business stops being interesting, and whoever wants me dead has everything they ever wanted." Clara opened her mouth. Nothing came out. "You still think I am protecting myself." He said it flatly. "You think I am a coward who let it happen because it was easier." "I don't know what you are." "No," he agreed, "you don't." And then the Duke of Ashworth stood up, and he set down the candle, and he began to unfasten his cuff. "Your Grace." He said nothing. He turned the cuff back once, twice, and pushed the sleeve up above the elbow, and he held his bare arm out into the candlelight. Clara looked, and her hand came up over her mouth. The forearm was thin, far thinner than it should have been on a man of his height and his shoulders. the muscle gone stringy and wasted like an old man's. But that was not what stopped her breath. It was the marks. They ran from the wrist to the inside of the elbow. Not bruises, not the purple of a knock or a fall. These were older and stranger. Dozens of them, small and dark and gray-brown, sunk into the skin rather than sitting on it, in blotches and streaks like ink dropped into water. Where they were thickest, the skin had gone rough and silvery and cracked, the way a scald looks years afterward. And along the base of every fingernail, clear as if it had been painted there, ran a pale, chalk-white band. 6 years, the Duke said. Clara could not speak. He does not come to see me. He comes to see the household, the grooms, the kitchen, the tenants. He is much loved. He has been dining at this table since I was 9 years old. He turned the arm slightly without expression, the way a man displays a horse's leg. It is in the port. It has been in the port since the spring before Margaret died. I worked it out in the 3rd year, and by then I had already drunk 500 glasses of it, and it does not come back out again. Then stop drinking it. I did, a short, terrible smile. The day I stopped, he changed his mind about my liver and prescribed something new. So I began drinking it again and pouring it away and letting him watch the level go down. The sleeve came back over the marks. I have been dying at exactly the rate he expects for 6 years, Miss Hale. It is the only reason I am still alive. He fastened his cuff. He has been very patient. 3 wives, and I could not give any of them a child, and everyone in 3 counties knows why by now I am a sick man with bad blood and a cursed house. Nobody is going to look twice when the 4th one goes. He picked up the candle again. And nobody is going to look at all when I follow her. Why? Clara's voice cracked. In God's name, why? What does he get? And the Duke of Ashworth looked at her over the flame, and for the first time since she had come to that house, Clara saw something in his face that was not cold at all. It was fear. That, he said, is the question I cannot answer. He has no claim on this estate. He does not inherit a penny. He is a country doctor with a good coat and no ambition anybody has ever been able to find. He set the candle down between them. Somebody is paying him, Miss Hale. Somebody has been paying him for 6 years. Who? I don't know. And from the hall below, quite distinctly, came the sound of the great front door opening, and a servant's voice, raised in surprise and pleasure, calling out a name. The Duke's head came up. Clara turned toward the door. Who is that? That, said the Duke slowly, is my cousin Julian, and he has not set foot in this house in 4 years. Julian Vane was the handsomest man Clara had ever seen. That was the first thing. He came into the hall shaking rain off his shoulders, laughing, already halfway through a sentence, and 2 footmen were smiling before he had finished it. He was perhaps 30, fair-haired where the Duke was dark, warm where the Duke was cold. He saw Clara on the stairs and stopped dead. Oh, he said, oh, forgive me, I am ambushing you in your own house. It isn't my house. It will be in a fortnight. He came up 2 steps and bowed properly, the way nobody had bowed to her since she arrived. Julian Vane, Nathaniel's cousin, his heir, and I am afraid there is no polite way to say this, his only living relative who still speaks to him. Clara curtsied, better than the first time. Clara Hale. I know, he smiled. Miss Clara Hale of Renford, and I have been in a fever of curiosity for a month. Clara's hand tightened on the banister. A month. She had been in this house for 12 days. He was wonderful at dinner. There was no other word for it. He talked to Mrs. Fenn's food as though it were a woman he was courting. He asked Clara about her village and knew the name of the church. He told a long, ridiculous story about a bishop and a goat that had Betsy biting the inside of her cheek by the sideboard. And he talked at the Duke, constantly, fondly, the way you talk to a difficult brother. Nathaniel, eat something. I have. You have moved it about the plate. Miss Hale, look at him. Look at what he does to himself. Julian turned to her, and there was real distress in his face, so real that Clara felt it pull at her. He was the best rider in this county. Do you know that? 12 years ago you could not keep up with him on a horse, and now look. The Duke said nothing. He cut his own meat from his own dish with his own knife. Merrick says it is the blood, Julian said quietly. He says it comes from his mother's people, but I have never once seen him try. Julian. I know. Julian raised both hands, laughing at himself. I am a bore. I have been a bore since I was 9. Miss Hale, you will forgive me. I have watched this man refuse to be helped for 6 years, and I have never learned to shut my mouth about it. He reached for the decanter and filled his own glass. Then he reached across, and before Clara could move, he had filled hers too. The port sat in front of her, dark red, catching the candlelight. Clara looked at it. She did not look at the Duke. She did not dare. She picked up the glass and she turned it slowly by the stem, and she set it down again untouched. I don't take wine, she said. My father did. There was a pause of exactly 1 heartbeat. Then Julian threw his head back and laughed, and said that was the finest reason he had ever heard, and that he intended to steal it. The Duke came to the library door at 11 and said 1 word. Now. Clara followed him in. He shut the door and turned the key. Do you drink the port? She asked. Every night, in front of him, 2 glasses, and then I go upstairs and put my fingers down my throat. He said it without any particular feeling. Sit down, Miss Hale. I am going to tell you why you are in this house, and you are going to hate me, and I would rather you were sitting. Clara did not sit. You told me you didn't know who was paying Merrick. I don't. Sit down. You said your cousin doesn't inherit a penny. He inherits the title and the land, and both are mortgaged past the roof beams. Julian Vane has £11,000 of debt and no way on earth to pay it. The Duke leaned back against the desk. I suspected him for 4 years. Of course I did. He is my heir and the estate is worth nothing, and I am not a fool. So I had him watched. He was in Lisbon for 2 of the years the tonic was being delivered. He has never sent Merrick a shilling. I have seen Merrick's bank. I paid a clerk 40 guineas for the privilege, and there is money going into that account every quarter from a house in London, and it is not my cousin's money, and it is not mine. Then whose? That, said the Duke, is what I have been trying to buy for 6 years. And a month ago somebody sold it to me. He opened a drawer and took out a letter. It was a single sheet, cheap paper, folded 3 times. No seal, no signature. The writing was small and cramped and slanted hard to the left, the way a right-handed person writes when they do not want their hand recognized. Clara took it to the candle. Your Grace, the 4th is already chosen. She will be brought to you before Christmas, and you will not be able to refuse her. Her name is Clara Hale. Her father owes £40 at the Wheatsheaf in Renford, and the paper is held against him. Ask her what her mother did in the spring of the year her Grace Margaret died. Ask her about the box. Burn this. Clara read it 4 times. The room was completely silent except for the fire. I don't understand, she said at last. I don't. My mother never. Sit down. She sat down. 12 days ago you asked me why a duke buys a farmer's daughter for £40. He took the letter back and put it in the drawer. The answer is that I did not buy a wife, Miss Hale. I bought that letter, and you came attached to it. Say it plainly. You were already coming here. His voice was flat. The debt was bought up in September by an agent in Norwich, and the agent was acting for my cousin Julian, and I can prove that much and no more. It was going to be called in at Christmas. Your father would have had 1 week to find 40 pounds, and when he could not, you would have been offered to this house as a," he paused, and chose the word carefully, "as a companion, a poor relation. A girl of no consequence living under my roof, with no family who could ask questions, and no money to leave with." Clara's hands had gone numb in her lap. "So I got there first," the Duke said. "I paid the debt in October, and I sent a carriage for you in November, and I put you upstairs in the East Wing where the fires are lit, and the food comes from my own plate. You have never once been out of the sight of somebody I trust, and I have 3 weeks to find out what your mother knew, because on the 12th of December this stops." The 12th, Clara's mouth was dry. "The banns the wedding." "Yes." "You chose that date." "Yes." "You chose it." She was on her feet. "You set our wedding on the day 3 women died in this house. Because it is the only day I know they will move." The Duke did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. She was learning to hate it. "Whoever this is has kept to that date for 6 years. It is not sentiment, it is bookkeeping. Merrick is paid quarter day and the quarter falls on the 12th. If I break the pattern, they will simply find another way and I will never see it coming. If I keep it, then I know the hour and the room and the man who will be standing in it." "And me," Clara's voice cracked. "Where am I standing?" He did not answer. "Say it." "You are standing in the middle of it," said the Duke of Ashworth. "You are the reason he will come." She hit him. She had never struck anybody in her life. It was not a slap, either. It was a closed fist, and it caught him on the cheekbone, and it hurt her hand so badly that tears came into her eyes. He did not move. He did not lift a hand. He stood there and took it, and then he turned his face back. "Say the rest of it," Clara said, shaking. "There is no rest. You used me. You sat there and let that doctor put a bottle in my hand. You knew what was in it. I told you not to eat in this house. You told me nothing. Because you would have run." It came out of him at last, one crack, one shout, and then it was gone again, and his hand was flat on the desk and he was breathing hard. "You would have run, and they would have found you on the road, and there would have been an accident, and I would have been standing here in the spring with a 5th name in my hand and nothing else. You are the only thing that has ever happened in 6 years that they did not arrange. Somebody wrote me that letter. Somebody in this is frightened enough to warn me, and they warned me about you. About my mother." "Yes." "My mother was a nurse in a village." Clara's voice was rising and she could not stop it. "She set bones and she laid out the dead, and she never in her life went further than—" She stopped. The Duke watched her stop. He said nothing at all. He simply waited, and Clara stood in the middle of that library with her fist still stinging, and felt something turn over inside her like a stone in a field. "She went away," she said. "When?" "I was 6. She was gone in the spring and she came back in the summer, and it was 10 or 11 weeks. Clara heard her own voice from very far off. She said she had a place in service in the East. My father said not to ask, because it was good money and she was proud." "How much money?" "Enough for a cow," Clara laughed. "It came out wrong. We had a cow that year. We had a cow, and my mother came home with her hair going gray at 29, and she never went into service again as long as she lived." The Duke turned to the shelf behind him and took down a heavy ledger. It was already marked with a strip of paper. He opened it and set it in front of her, and put his finger on a line. Clara looked. It was a household account. Old ink, brown at the edges, column after column of names, wages, quarters. Nurse, sick room, second attendant. A. Hale, 11 weeks, 4 pounds. And at the top of the page, in the same hand, the year. The year Margaret, Duchess of Ashworth, took 11 weeks to die. Clara sat on the library floor. She did not remember deciding to. Her legs had simply stopped, and the Duke had not tried to lift her, which she was obscurely grateful for. He had crouched down a little distance away with his back against a bookcase, and he was waiting, and for once in his miserable cold life he was waiting quietly. "She used to check the door twice," Clara said. "What?" "Every night. Every single night of my childhood, my mother got up after we were in bed and she checked the door twice." Clara wiped her face with the back of her wrist. "I thought all mothers did that, and she would never let me take anything from anyone in the village. Not a sweet, not an apple, not a cup of milk from a neighbor. She used to say." She stopped. "She used to say what?" "Eat what I give you." Clara looked up. "She used to say, 'Eat what I give you, Clara, not what they give you.'" The fire moved in the grate. "The letter said there was a box," the Duke said quietly. And Clara nodded, because there was. There had always been. "It's under the floor of my mother's room," she said. "Third board from the window. She showed me where it was when she was dying, and she made me swear I would not open it." "Why?" She said. Clara pressed her hands over her eyes. She said, "If you never open it, they've no reason to come." She said it was the only safe thing left in the world, and the way to keep it safe was to leave it shut. She lowered her hands. "Your Grace, what did my mother see?" "I don't know," said the Duke. "But somebody has known for 16 years that she saw it, and they left her alone in that cottage for 16 years, and they have not left you alone for a fortnight." "Then get the box." "I cannot send for it." He shook his head. "The moment a man from this house rides west, they will know exactly what we have and where we are going. Whatever your mother put under that floor will be ashes before we reach the county line." "Then we go ourselves." "Yes." "When?" "Soon, quietly, before the 12th. He got to his feet. "Say nothing to anyone, not Mrs. Pike, not the girl, nobody in this house." Clara took the hand he offered and let him pull her up. "And your cousin." "Especially my cousin." She found Mrs. Pike in the linen room at midnight, because she could not have slept for 100 pounds. The old woman was folding sheets by candlelight. She did not seem surprised to see her. "I've one question," Clara said. "Ask it." "The first Duchess, Margaret." Clara shut the door behind her. "How did she meet him? A marquis's daughter with 40,000 pounds. How does she meet a poor duke in a cold house in Norfolk?" Mrs. Pike went on folding. "She was brought." "Brought by whom?" "Mr. Julian brought her." Fold. Smooth. "He was up at Cambridge with her brother. He fetched the whole family down for the shooting, and there she was." Clara's skin had begun to crawl. "And the second, Sophia?" "Mr. Julian's doing. She was a cousin of a friend of his in Bath." "And Isabel?" Mrs. Pike stopped folding. She stood with her hands flat on the linen, and she looked at the wall for a long moment. And when she spoke, her voice had gone very careful, the way a person speaks when they are stepping across ice. "Mr. Julian brought her down for a fortnight in the June," she said. "He said she was the sweetest girl in England, and she was, and they were married by the Michaelmas." The candle guttered. "Mrs. Pike," Clara could hardly get the words out, "he chose all three of them." "Lie." "He chose all three of them, and they all had the same face." "Aye," said Mrs. Pike, "and now he's chosen you." The next 4 days were the strangest of Clara's life, because they were happy. That was the horror of it. Julian Vane set himself to make her laugh, and he was extremely good at it. He found her in the yellow drawing room on the first morning and declared the shutters a scandal. And then he went through the entire ground floor with 2 footmen and a crowbar, opening rooms that had been shut since Isabel died. Light came into that house for the first time in 6 years. Clara stood in the ballroom and watched dust turn gold in the air and could not help herself. She laughed out loud. "There," said Julian, from the top of a ladder. "That's the first time I've heard that sound in this house since I was a boy." You'll catch it from your cousin. I have been catching it from my cousin since I was 9 years old. Hand me the muslin. He was kind to the servants. He remembered Betsy's mother was ill and asked after her by name. He gave Mrs. Fenn a bottle of French brandy and told her it was a bribe and that he expected results. He walked the tenants' cottages in the rain and came back with mud to the knee and a list of roofs that wanted mending. And on the third day he found Clara in the long gallery, standing in front of Isabel. He stopped in the doorway. He did not come any closer. "I can't look at that one," he said. Clara turned. Julian's face had changed completely. All the brightness had gone out of it, and what was underneath was so raw that she looked away out of decency. "You knew her well." "I brought her here," he said it quietly. "Did they tell you that? I brought all three of them here. Margaret because I was fond of her brother. Sophia because I thought a house with a piano in it ought to have somebody who could play the thing." He came a few steps into the room at last. "And Isabel because I loved her." Clara's breath caught. "You." "Oh, don't," Julian smiled, and it was a terrible smile. "I was 26 and I had £11,000 of debt and she was a bishop's daughter. I could not have kept her in gloves. Nathaniel could give her this." He waved a hand at the vast cold room and a name and a place, and I thought, well, at least she will be near. At least I will see her at Christmas. He stopped in front of the portrait. 9 weeks, he said. "I have thought about it every day for 6 years, Miss Hale. Every single day I think I put her in that house." Clara did not know what to say. She thought, this man is either innocent, or he is the finest liar in England. And then she thought with a cold little lurch, and I cannot tell which. That is the whole of it, I cannot tell. "Why do you come back?" she asked, "if it hurts you so much?" "Because he has nobody." Julian turned round. "Because there is a man in that library who has buried 3 wives and is dying of something no doctor can name, and he will not be helped, and he will not be spoken to, and if I stop coming then there is not one living soul left who calls him by his Christian name." He picked his hat up off the chair. "And now there is you," he said, "so perhaps I shall be able to stop worrying at last." She told the Duke about it that night, through the library door, in the low flat voice they had both learned to use. He listened to all of it without moving. "Do you believe him?" he said at last. "I don't know." "Neither do I, and I have known him 30 years. He looked into the fire. "That is what frightens me most, not that he is wicked, that I cannot find it." "Your Grace," Clara hesitated, "if he loved Isabel, then he is the last person on earth who would have hurt her." The Duke's mouth twisted. "Or the first. Grief and hatred are the same animal wearing different coats, Miss Hale. I have been both." Her father came on the 9th of December. Clara was in the kitchen when the cart came up the drive. She had never given up her mornings there, and Mrs. Fenn had stopped pretending to object. And she heard the horse and looked out through the scullery window, and did not, for 1 full second, believe her eyes. Thomas Hale climbed down from a hired gig in his good coat, the one he was married in, the one he wore to funerals. Clara was out of the door and across the yard before she knew she had moved. He looked at her, and his whole face fell apart. "Clara." She stopped 3 feet away. He had aged 10 years in a month. His hair had gone thin at the front. His hands were shaking, not drink. She knew what his hands looked like with drink in them, and he was holding his hat against his chest like a boy at a hiring fair. "I've come to say it to your face," he said. "I've been 3 weeks getting the nerve." "Say what?" "That I did it." His voice broke on the second word and he pushed through it anyway. "That there's no excuse and I'm not going to stand here and hunt for one. I sat down at that table and I put my own daughter on the paper because I'd nothing else left to put, and I told myself it would come right, and it didn't, and I've not had 1 hour's sleep since." The yard was very quiet. Clara was aware of Betsy's face in the scullery window and did not care. £40, she said. £40. You sold me for £40. He did not look away. That was the thing that undid her. He did not look away this time. And if I live to be 100, I'll not say a word in my own defense. I'm not asking you to have me back. I'm not asking you to write. I only wanted you to hear it from me and not from the neighbors, because they'll be saying I was tricked, and I wasn't tricked, Clara. I was greedy and I was drunk and I was your father and I did it. Clara's eyes had gone hot and blurred. She thought about the trap he had put her in. She thought about the carriage in the rain and the wardrobe full of gowns that fit, and Mrs. Pike saying you'll be the fourth then. And then she thought about a man of 56 sitting up 3 weeks in a cold cottage, working out how to say a thing that could not be said. Papa. She went to him. He held on to her the way a drowning man holds on to a rope, and he wept into her shoulder in the middle of the stable yard of Ashworth Hall, and Clara stood in the wet and let him. He would not come further than the kitchen. I'll not sit in a duke's parlor with these boots. Papa, you'll sit where I put you. Kitchen, said Thomas Hale, and Mrs. Fenn, who had been listening to every word without shame, pulled a chair out for him and put the kettle on the fire. He sat. He turned his hat around and around in his hands, and then he remembered, and he reached down into the bag at his feet. I brought you something. It was a caddy of tea. Clara knew what it had cost him before she touched it. It was good tea, black and oily and fragrant, in a proper tin caddy with a hinged lid, the sort of thing that stood on a shelf in a farmhouse for 20 years and got passed to a daughter when she married. There was a paper label still stuck to the side with a London seal on it. Papa, this is. It's not enough. This is 4 shillings worth. It's not enough, Clara. He shoved it at her. Nothing's enough, but your mother liked her tea and you like your tea, and I couldn't come with empty hands. Clara opened the lid. The smell came up warm and dark and faintly smoky, and for one moment she was 6 years old in a cottage with the rain on the roof and her mother's hands on the pot. Then you'll drink a cup of it with me, she said. Right now, both of us. Mrs. Fenn was already reaching for the good pot. Afterwards, Clara went over those 4 minutes 1,000 times. She measured the leaves in herself. She poured the water in herself. She watched Mrs. Fenn set out 3 cups, and she took the milk from the same jug as everybody else, and there was not one moment, not one, when anybody's hand went near that pot but her own. That was the part she could never explain. The tea was made. Her father had his cup in his hand. Clara had hers halfway to her mouth, and she was laughing at something Mrs. Fenn had said about the brandy. The kitchen door hit the wall. Mrs. Pike came through it at a dead run. She did not speak. She did not slow down. She struck the cup out of Clara's hand exactly as she had struck the spoon, and it went across the flagstones and smashed, and hot tea went everywhere. Clara's father was on his feet with his own cup still raised. Put it down, Mrs. Pike said. He put it down. Mrs. Pike. Where did that tea come from? My father brought it. Where did he get it? And Thomas Hale, standing in a strange kitchen with his hat in his hand and his daughter's tea running across the floor, said the words that Clara would hear in her sleep for the rest of her life. It was a gift, he said, from the gentleman. The kitchen went absolutely silent. What gentleman? Clara whispered. The gentleman from this house. Her father looked from face to face, bewildered, beginning to be frightened. He come to Renford a week since. Handsome young fellow, fair. Said he was the Duke's cousin. Said he swallowed. Said he'd seen how it was between you and me, and that it wasn't right a man should lose his girl over a card game, and that if I come and said my piece I might be forgiven. He hired the gig himself. He said I oughtn't come empty-handed, and he give me the caddy out of his own bag, and said it was the finest in London. Clara could not feel her hands. He told you what to say. He told me to say it honest, her father said, and I did. The cat came out from under the dresser about an hour later. Her name was Soot. She was old and enormously fat, and she had ruled that kitchen for 11 years, and Clara had been feeding her bacon rind every morning since her second week in the house. Nobody saw her do it. Everybody was shouting. Mrs. Fenn was crying, Betsy had been sent for the Duke, and Clara was on her knees with a cloth trying to gather up the broken china because her hands needed something to do. By the time she looked up, the flagstones were dry, and the cat was sitting on the hearth washing her face. Clara said, "Oh God." Soot died at some time before 4 o'clock in the morning. Betsy found her by the fire when she came down to lay it. She had not been sick and she had not cried out. Mrs. Fenn had a bed off the passage and swore she would have heard it. She had simply gone to sleep in her usual place and had not woken up, and when Betsy touched her, she was stiff and cold and her eyes were open. They laid her in a basket in the scullery. Clara stood looking at her for a long time. Then she turned and walked out through the yard, still in her nightgown with a shawl over it, into a morning so cold the puddles had gone white. The Duke found her by the stable wall. He had a lamp and no coat, and the look of a man who had not been to bed either. 9 hours, Clara said. I know. 9 hours, Your Grace, not 11 weeks, not 9 weeks, 9 hours. She turned round and her face was wet and furious. That thing in the bottle takes months. You've drunk it for 6 years and you're still standing. Whatever was in that caddy killed a full-grown animal between supper and dawn. I know. Then what changed? She shouted. And the Duke of Ashworth stood in the freezing yard with the lamp in his hand, and gave her the answer she had already worked out and did not want. You did, he said. You have not touched the tonic. You did not drink the port. You have eaten off my plate at my table in front of him for 4 days. He set the lamp down on the wall. They have been feeding this house poison for 6 years because slow poison looks like God's will. It only works on people who do not know. You know, so there is no more point in being patient. Clara wrapped her arms around herself. He tried to make it my father's hand, she said. That's what I can't. He sat in the kitchen and he wept on me, and if I had drunk that cup, he would have gone to his grave believing he killed his own daughter. Yes. Why? Because a girl poisoned by a duke is a scandal, the Duke said. A girl poisoned by the drunken father who already sold her once is a Tuesday. Nobody would have looked at this house at all. The sun was coming up somewhere behind the fog, gray and useless. Clara stood very still and felt the last of something go out of her, the part that had still been arguing, the part that had still wanted the handsome man with the crowbar and the list of roofs to be innocent. We go for the box, she said. Clara. It was the first time he had used her name. We go today, she said. They left at 4 in the morning on the 10th of December. Not from the front. Mrs. Pike had a nephew in the stables who brought 2 horses to the kitchen gate with their hooves wrapped in sacking, and the Duke lifted Clara up in front of him, because there was no time to teach her to ride and no time to argue about it. How long? 9 hours if the roads hold. We sleep at an inn tonight and we are back tomorrow. And if the roads don't hold? Then we are back on the 12th, said the Duke, and I would rather not be. Mrs. Pike stood in the gateway with a lantern. She had a story ready, a sick tenant, a night on the road, his Grace gone to Norwich about the lawyers, and she had made Betsy repeat it back to her twice. Mr. Julian will ask. Let him ask. He'll be at breakfast in 4 hours, Your Grace, and there'll be 2 horses gone out of that stable. Then he will know we have gone somewhere, the Duke said. He will not know where, that is all I need. He put his heels in. Clara looked back once. Ashworth Hall stood black against a black sky with one window burning on the ground floor, and she could not for the life of her remember which room it was. She had never ridden further than a field. By noon her legs had stopped being legs. They stopped at a coaching inn near Thetford, and she got down and simply sat on the mounting block for a while because her knees would not lock. The Duke came out with bread and cold beef wrapped in a cloth. Eat. Where did that come from? He looked at her. Then something happened to his face that Clara had never seen before. The corner of his mouth moved. It was not a smile, it was too small and too rusty for that, but it was in the neighborhood of one. I watched him cut it, he said, from a joint on the block. I chose the loaf myself from the middle of a stack, and I paid for it in coin he had not seen before. And there is a well in that yard, and I drew the water up out of it with my own hands. Clara took the bread. Do you do that everywhere? Everywhere for 6 years. He sat down on the block beside her, at a careful distance. It takes about 4 minutes, and I have never once got it wrong, and I will tell you the truth, Miss Hale, I cannot remember what it is like to be hungry and simply eat. She ate. It was the best bread she had ever tasted in her life. Your Grace. Why did you agree? She turned to look at him. When they offered me, you could have said no. Whatever the letter said, you could have burnt it and let me arrive at Christmas and put me in the West Wing with the other poor relations, and I would have been nothing to do with you. The Duke looked out at the yard. Because I read the letter and I thought, there is a girl in Renford who does not know she has been sold. He said it evenly, and I could not think of one single argument for leaving her there. He stood up. Also, I have wanted for 6 years to know who is killing my wives, he said, and you were the only thread anybody had ever handed me, so do not make me better than I am. Both things are true. They came into Renford at dusk. Clara had been gone 28 days. It was the strangest thing she had ever felt, the church, the pump, the smell of the tanner's yard, all of it exactly as she had left it, and none of it hers any more. Her father's cottage stood at the end of the lane, with no smoke coming out of the chimney. She was off the horse before it had properly stopped. Papa. The door was not locked. It was not even shut. It stood 2 inches open, and there was a drift of dead leaves inside it. Papa. The Duke came in behind her with his hand inside his coat, and Clara understood for the first time that he had been carrying a pistol since Ashworth. The cottage had been searched. Not robbed, nothing was gone. The pewter was still on the shelf. Her father's second coat still hung on the nail. But every drawer stood open. The mattress had been pulled off the bed and slit down its length. The chimney had been swept out onto the hearth, and there was soot across half the floor in the shape of a man's boot. And in the little back room that had been her mother's, the floor had been taken up. Every board, all of them, prized out and stacked against the wall like firewood, and the earth underneath turned over with a spade. Clara stood in the doorway and could not make a sound. How long? The Duke said. The soot's dry, Clara crouched. Her voice came out very steady, which surprised her. 2 days, perhaps 3. Then he did it before he came to Renford for your father. He did it, and then he came to Renford for my father. She stood up. He came here, he tore up my mother's floor, he didn't find it, and then he went to the Wheatsheaf and bought my father a gig and a caddy of tea. The Duke was very still. He wanted the box first, he said slowly, and when he could not have the box, he decided nobody needed to open it. Clara turned around. Your Grace, he didn't find it. How do you know? Because he'd have stopped looking. She pointed at the stacked boards. Look, he took up the whole floor, Every board right to the wall. A man who finds what he came for doesn't finish the job. She went out to the garden. The Duke came after her with the lantern. Miss Hale. Third board from the window, Clara said. That's what she told me. On her last night, when she could hardly get the words out, third board from the window, Clara, and swear to me you'll leave it shut. That floor is gone. That floor is the wrong floor. She stopped at the far end of the vegetable patch, where the ground was hard and white with frost, in front of a low black shape against the hedge. The privy. She said the third board from the window, Clara said. She never said which window. The Duke lifted the lantern. I was 6 years old and my mother was dying, and I never once thought to ask. Clara's voice had begun to shake at last. She had been in service in a great house. She came home frightened, and she hid the only thing that could kill her in the one place in England that no gentleman on earth would ever put his hands into. There was a very long pause. There is a spade by the door, said the Duke of Ashworth, and he took off his coat. It took an hour, and it was, without any question, the worst hour of Clara's life. The boards came up. The Duke went in past the elbow twice and said nothing at all, which she thought afterwards was the single most impressive thing she had ever seen a man do. Third board from the window, the little 4-inch window in the door that let in the light. It was there. A tin box, the sort of thing a soldier keeps letters in, wrapped in 2 layers of oilcloth and tied with tarred string, wedged into the joist where a child's arm might reach, and a grown man's would not think to. The Duke carried it to the pump, and stood there working the handle over his own arms in the freezing dark for a very long time. Clara stood by with the lantern. Your Grace. Don't. I only wanted to say. Miss Hale, if you thank me for this, I will put you back on that horse. They opened it on the table in the cottage kitchen, with the shutters closed and a candle in a jug so the light would not show at the window. Inside the oilcloth was the tin. Inside the tin, wrapped in a clean linen napkin that Clara recognized as her mother's, were 3 things. The first was a small stoppered bottle of dark green glass, about 1/3 full. The cork was sealed over with candle wax. The second was a notebook, a servant's notebook, the cheap kind, with a marbled cover gone soft with handling. The third was a folded paper, sealed, and on it in her mother's careful, labored hand, to be opened by a magistrate. Clara sat down slowly. That's her writing. Read the book. She opened it. Her mother had not been a fluent writer. The letters were large and slow, and she had run words together where she was tired. It was a nurse's day book, what was given when and what happened after. April 3. Her Grace took the tonic at 8, sick at 11. Doc says it is the fever turning. April 9. Numbness in the fingers of the left hand. Doc says nerves. April 14. I have kept back a spoon of the tonic in a bottle. God forgive me, but I have. April 21. Her Grace cannot hold the cup today. I asked Doc M could we stop the tonic a week and see. He was very angry with me. May 2. I gave her only water and made a show with the bottle. 3 days now and she is better. She sat up and asked for the dog. May 6. Doc M has been in the sick room alone. This morning she is bad again and worse than before. May 7. He knows. Clara stopped. He knows, she read aloud. That's all, that's the whole entry. She turned the page. May 9. Doc M spoke to me on the stair. He was kind and smiling all the while he said it. He said, Mrs. Hale, you have a little girl at home. He said, Renford is a long way and roads are wicked things. He said no one would ever ask. May 10. I am to go home Friday. I am paid to the quarter and £4 over for my trouble. I am not to write and I am not to be asked for again. Friday, Her Grace held my hand and said, "You were kind to me. I have taken the bottle and the paper. God forgive me, I am going home to my child." The candle burned in the jug. Clara put her hand flat on the page. 16 years, she said. 16 years she checked that door twice a night. Open the paper. To be opened by a magistrate. Clara broke the seal. It was one page, written slowly and in fear, and it began, "I, Anne Hale of Renford in the county of Norfolk, being of sound mind, do say what I saw in the house of Ashworth in the spring of the year 1809. It said it all out, the tonic, the bottle kept back, the 3 days of water and the Duchess sitting up to ask for the dog, the doctor alone in the sick room and what came after, the words on the stair. And then at the bottom in a different ink, added later, years later, by a hand that had grown older and shakier. I say also that on the 9th of May I was sent to the still room for the doctor's case, and I read the bill that was in it, for I can read print though I write but poor. The bill was from a chemist in London, and it was for the making up of the tonic to the doctor's order quarterly, and it was not paid by the doctor. It was to be sent for payment to the party named at the foot, which was—" Clara stopped breathing. "Which was Mr. J. Vane, at Fenchurch Street in London. And on the same bill was writ, in a hand not the chemist's, to be continued at the same strength until the account is closed. Anne Hale, her mark witnessed by Jos, Barrow, curate of this parish, 1811. Clara looked up. The Duke had gone perfectly white. "Say it," she whispered. 1809. His voice was not quite working. "Clara, in 1809 my cousin Julian was 15 years old and at school in Harrow." The candle guttered in the jug. "Then who?" "His father." The Duke sat down very suddenly on the settle. "Mr. J. Vane, Mr. John Vane, my uncle." "Your uncle is—" "Dead, 11 years dead." He was staring at nothing. "He died in the spring of the year Sophia was married. I stood at his grave in Fenchurch churchyard, and I was glad, God help me, because he had spent my whole boyhood telling me I was a weak, sickly, worthless thing who would not see 30. Clara's mind was going very fast and very cold. "Your Grace, who inherited his estate?" "Julian, he was 21. "And his papers, his accounts, his arrangements?" The Duke looked up at her. "Everything," he said. "Everything in Fenchurch Street, including whatever standing order his father had left with a chemist and a country doctor." Clara sat down opposite him. "Until the account is closed," she said slowly. "That's not a threat, is it? That's a standing instruction. It's been running for 17 years. He inherited it." The Duke's hands had closed on the edge of the table. "At 21, he opened his father's papers and found that his father had been paying a doctor for 6 years to kill me by inches, and he did not stop it." "He did not stop it," Clara said. "He used it. Your uncle only ever wanted you dead. But you didn't die, you were young and you were strong, and it was taking too long. So when Julian took it over, he added something new. The wives." "The wives." Clara's voice was shaking now. "Because a sick duke might still get an heir. That's the one thing that would ruin everything. So he brought you Margaret, and he sat there and watched her die, and then he brought you Sophia. And then Isabel." The Duke stood up so fast the settle went over backwards. He walked 3 steps and stopped with his back to her, and Clara watched his shoulders and had the sense, quite clearly, of a man holding on to the edge of something with his fingernails. "He loved her," he said. "Your Grace." "He loved her, Clara. He was not lying about that. I saw his face at that funeral. He turned around, and his eyes were wet and absolutely wild. He killed a woman he loved rather than let me have a son." The cottage was silent. Clara looked down at the little green bottle, and the notebook, and one page of her mother's careful, terrified handwriting. "Then he will not stop," she said. "Not for anything, not for me." "No." "Which is why we are going to a magistrate tonight." "Tonight," the Duke agreed. "Norwich. There is a man there my father trusted, and he is 80 and deaf and honest, and he is 9 miles from this door." He was already reaching for the box. And Clara said, "No, not all of it." He stopped. "My mother kept it under a floor for 16 years, Clara said. "She was cleverer than both of us, and she was frightened every day of her life. We take the statement and the notebook. The bottle stays." "Clara, the bottle is the proof. The bottle is the only thing in England that cannot be written again." She was already wrapping it back in the linen. "If we walk into a room with everything and that room turns out to be wrong, we have nothing left. Split it." The Duke looked at her for a long moment. "Where?" Clara thought. Then she picked up the candle and walked into her mother's ruined bedroom, and she knelt down in the turned earth in the corner where the boards were already up, and nobody would ever think to look twice, and she buried the little green bottle 9 inches deep in ground that had already been searched. They rode into Norwich a little after 10 at night. The magistrate's house had lights in it. That was the first good thing that had happened in 2 days, and Clara was so tired that she took it as a sign. They were shown in by a servant. Sir Edmund Latimer was 81 and deaf as a post, and he read the statement 3 times, twice with a glass. He read the notebook. He asked Clara 9 questions about her mother in a voice like a gate, and he did not once talk over her answers. Then he took off his spectacles. "This is the worst thing I have read in 40 years on the bench," he said. "I shall write to the coroner tonight, and I shall have the doctor before me on Monday. Nathaniel, look at me. You will not go back to that house." "I have to go back to that house." "You will not." "Sir Edmund," the Duke leaned forward. "If I am not at Ashworth in the morning, he will know exactly what has happened. He has £11,000 of debt and a rope in front of him. Give me 2 days and he will come at me himself, and you will have him in the act." "And the girl?" "The girl stays here," said the Duke. "The girl," said Clara, "is sitting in the room." They argued about it for an hour. She won, because she was right, and because the old man on the bench said the one thing neither of them could answer, that the woman who had actually read the statement was the only witness who could not be silenced by burning it. They rode back at dawn on the 11th. It was raining again by the time they came up the long avenue, and Clara was so exhausted she was holding on to the saddle with both hands, and the notebook and the statement were inside the Duke's coat against his chest. Ashworth Hall came out of the grey. There were 4 horses standing at the front door. Not carriage horses, not the Duke's. 4 saddle horses steaming in the wet, held by a boy Clara had never seen, and behind them, drawn up on the gravel, a closed black carriage with the blinds down. The front door of the house stood wide open, and on the steps out of the rain, 3 men were waiting. One was the parish constable. One was Dr. Merrick, with his bag in his hand. And one was Julian Vane, bareheaded in the doorway of the house he was going to inherit, watching them ride up the drive with an expression of absolute, unbearable grief. "Oh, thank God," he called out. "Nathaniel, thank God, we have been out all night looking for her." Julian came down the steps into the rain with both hands out. "Where did you find her? We have had men on every road since 6 o'clock. Merrick has been up all night." "Get away from the horse." "Nathaniel, get away from the horse." The constable came forward then. He was a heavy, slow man of about 50 with rain running off the brim of his hat, and he did not look like a man enjoying himself. "Your Grace, I'll have to ask you to come down." "On what grounds?" On the information laid by Mr. Vane, the constable glanced at Julian and away again. That Miss Clara Hale was took out of this house between 4 and 5 yesterday morning without her father's leave and not seen since. And on the other matter. What other matter? The cat, said Julian. Clara's stomach turned over. The kitchen cat died on the night of the 9th, Julian said quietly. Within an hour of drinking tea that was poured for Miss Hale, Mrs. Fenn saw it, the scullery girl saw it. Mrs. Pike knocked the cup out of her hand herself. He turned to the constable and his voice was thick. I have said nothing about this house for 6 years, Mr. Ayres. 3 women. 3. And I told myself every time that I was a suspicious, jealous, worthless sort of man for even thinking it. He looked up at his cousin on the horse. And then I came down to breakfast yesterday, and there was a dead cat in a basket, and the girl was gone. Clara heard herself say, very clearly, he gave my father the tea. Julian's face did something extraordinary. It crumpled genuinely, wholly crumpled, the way a man's face does when he is struck. I gave your father a gig, he said. I gave him 4 shillings of tea from my own bag because he had walked 11 miles to the Wheatsheaf to ask a stranger how a man goes about begging his daughter's pardon. His voice broke. Oh, Clara, oh, my dear girl, what has he told you? Don't call me Mr. Ayres. The Duke's voice cut across both of them, flat and hard. I have this morning come from the house of Sir Edmund Latimer in Norwich, where I laid a sworn statement before a magistrate at 11 o'clock last night. You will find it entered in his book. Send to him. The constable's face changed. Sir Edmund. Sir Edmund. The Duke put his hand inside his coat and brought out the notebook and the folded paper, and he held them up in the rain. A statement made in 1811 by Anne Hale, nurse of Renford, witnessed by the curate of that parish. It names the man who ordered the tonic that killed my wife Margaret, and it names the account it was billed to. He looked down at Julian. Fenchurch Street. For one moment, one single moment, and Clara would think about it for the rest of her life. Julian Vane did not move at all. Then he said, Fenchurch Street. Yes. My father's house. Julian's voice had gone very soft. Nathaniel, my father has been dead 11 years. Your father began it, you continued it. Oh God! Julian put his hand over his mouth. He turned away, took 2 steps, and stood there in the rain with his back to them all. When he spoke again, it was to the constable, and it came out unsteady and reasonable and terribly, terribly convincing. Mr. Ayres, he has known for years that I do not defend my father's memory. My father was a hard man and a bad one, and he loathed his nephew, and everybody in this county knows it. He wiped his face. And now 3 women are dead, and there is a dead cat in the kitchen. And my cousin has produced a paper in a dead woman's hand, witnessed by a dead curate, naming a dead man. He turned round. That is very convenient, Nathaniel, he said. That is the most convenient piece of paper in England. Dr. Merrick asked to see it. He read it standing in the hall with the rain dripping off all of them onto the flags, and he read it slowly, and his round, comfortable face went gray. Anne Hale, he said, second attendant, yes, yes, I remember her. You threatened her on the stair, Clara said. I did nothing of the sort, my dear, and if she wrote that then she believed it, and I am more sorry than I can say. He lowered the paper. His hands were shaking. Clara saw it and could not tell whether it was fear or age or grief. I do remember quarreling with her. She wanted the tonic stopped, and I would not have it stopped, because her grace was better on it and worse off it, and I was 38 years old and certain of everything. He looked up. I have wondered about that woman for 17 years. He handed the statement to the constable. Mr. Ayres, this must go to the coroner, all of it tonight. Clara stared at him. She had been braced for denial, for outrage, for the man to snatch it and put it in the fire, and instead he had handed it over with his own hand and asked for the coroner. And she understood, 3 seconds later in a rush of ice. "No," she said. "Miss Hale." "No," she turned to the Duke. "Your Grace, don't let him." But Sir Edmund Latimer's letter had gone out at midnight, and it was already 9 miles away, and it said what an honest magistrate's letter says. "Exhume them." They opened the graves behind the chapel on the 14th of December. Clara was not there. She heard it from the window of the room she was not allowed to leave, the sound of spades going for 2 days in the frost. Margaret Sophia Isabel. The county analyst came out from Norwich with a case of glass jars and worked in the stable block for 11 days, and on Christmas Eve he gave his finding to the coroner. Arsenic, in all 3, in the hair, in the nails, in the liver, administered over months in repeated small doses by a hand that had access to them daily. It was the single most conclusive piece of evidence in the history of the county. And it hanged Nathaniel Vane. Clara understood it fully only when she heard the coroner's clerk explain it to the constable in the hall below, patiently, the way you explain a sum to a slow child. The poison was proved, the murders were proved, there was no question left about whether. There was only who. And in that house, for 6 years, there had been one man who was in it every single day. One man who slept under that roof, who sat at that table, who signed for the wine and the coal and the physician's bills. One man who had inherited from all 3 and married all 3 and buried all 3. Dr. Merrick came 4 times a year and lived 9 miles off. Julian Vane had been in Lisbon for 2 of them and could prove it. But he was poisoned too, Clara shouted through the door. Look at his arms, look at his hands. "Ah," said the clerk on the other side of it not unkindly. "That's the sorrow of it, miss. They do that." "What?" "Take it themselves, in little doses over years to build the tolerance up and put the look of illness on them." He sighed. "There was a man in Suffolk did the very same. It's an old trick and the assizes know it well." The trial was set for the 4th of March at Norwich. Clara wrote 19 letters. She wrote to Sir Edmund and got back 3 lines in a shaking hand, that he had done his duty, that the duty had gone where the evidence pointed, and that he was very sorry, and that he was too old and too ill to be of further use to anybody. He died in February. She wrote to the Duke's London solicitors, who replied that they were instructed and would of course consider any evidence Miss Hale could produce. That was the word they used, produce. Because the statement was gone. It had gone to the coroner's office at Norwich, and it had gone from the coroner's office into the great bundle of papers for the assize, and somewhere between one and the other there had been a fire in a clerk's room on the 8th of January, at night, and nobody had been hurt, and it was a very old building with very bad flues. Anne Hale's statement, the notebook gone. "Then I'll say it myself," Clara told the solicitor. "I read every word of it. I'll stand up and I'll say it." The solicitor looked at his hands. "Miss Hale," he said, "there is a difficulty about that. Dr. Merrick's certificate was dated the 2nd of February. He was very sorry to have to give it. He had known the young woman since November. He had watched her deteriorate under the strain of an engagement to a man now charged with 3 murders, and he blamed himself entirely for not having seen it sooner. He set out the facts as a physician must, without embellishment. That the young woman believed, without evidence, that a respected physician of 31 years' standing was poisoning an entire household. That she had, by her own account, ridden out of the house at 4 in the morning alone, with a man to whom she was not married. That she had, by her own account, dug up a privy floor at midnight in a village 80 miles away. That she claimed to have buried a bottle of poison in a garden, but could produce nothing, and asked the court to believe in a bottle that only she had ever seen. That she had struck out at the housekeeper when restrained, wept for whole days, and refused food prepared in the ordinary way, insisting that everything she ate be brought to her sealed. Nervous hysteria of the prenuptial type, aggravated by shock, and attended by fixed delusions of persecution. It is my opinion that this young woman is not of sound mind and cannot give evidence. They took her before a commission in a room in Norwich on the 9th of February. 3 men, a doctor, a lawyer, and a magistrate who was not Sir Edmund. Clara had thought about it for a week. She had gone over every word. She wore the plainest gown she owned, and she folded her hands, and she spoke slowly, and she did not weep, not once, and she told them the truth in the flattest voice she could manage. She watched it happen anyway. She watched a man write something down when she said the fire in the grate turned green. She watched 2 of them glance at each other when she said, "I buried the bottle myself, in the dark, in my mother's floor." She watched the lawyer's mouth tighten with pity, when she said, "He is not sick, sir, he is being poisoned. He has been poisoned for 6 years, and he pours his port down his own throat and brings it back up in his room every night so that the doctor will not change the dose." And she heard from a long way off how it sounded. It sounded like a mad woman. There was one thing left. She had held it back deliberately, the last card, the only one that could not be explained away. "There is a man," she said, "a chemist in London. My mother read his bill with her own eyes. Find the chemist and you will find the account, and the account is not in his Grace's name." "Which chemist, Miss Hale?" Clara opened her mouth. She had read the statement twice by candlelight in a cottage in Renford with a dead cat and a dug-up floor behind her and a man's life in front of her. And she had read the words "a chemist in London" and the words "Fenchurch Street." And she had not written down the name, because she had been holding the only copy in her hands, and it had never once occurred to her that paper could burn. "I don't know," she said. The magistrate wrote it down. Her father signed the papers on the 11th. That was the part Clara could not think about at all afterwards. It was like putting your hand on a stove. He was her nearest relative. She was unmarried, 22, and had no money of her own. Somebody had to be appointed to have the care of her, and Thomas Hale of Renford was a man of 56 with no roof of his own any more and a debt he had not been able to pay in 40 years. Julian Vane sat with him for 2 hours. Julian Vane explained, gently, with tears in his eyes, that the girl had been through a horror no woman should endure, that she was ill, not wicked, that Ashworth had a quiet east wing and a fire and a woman to sit with her, and that no expense of any kind would ever fall on her father. And Thomas Hale, who could not read the paper he was given, made his mark on it. He was told it was for her protection. It was, in fact, an appointment of Mr. Julian Vane as guardian of the person and estate of Clara Hale, spinster, of unsound mind, the estate being nothing at all, and the person being everything. They took her back to Ashworth on the 12th of February, and they put her in the east attic, because it was warm and it was quiet, and the window was too small to be a danger to her. The lock was new. She heard the man fitting it. Mrs. Fenn was dismissed in the first week for insolence. Betsy went home to her mother in the second. Mrs. Pike stayed. Clara hated her for it for 11 days, heard her step on the stair each morning, heard the tray set down, heard the key turn, and lay with her face to the wall and would not speak to her. On the 12th day she gave up and asked, "Why are you still here?" Mrs. Pike set the tray down. "Because he'd have put a stranger on the door," she said, "and a stranger wouldn't have brought you that." Clara looked. Under the bread, folded small, was a page from a newspaper. The trial had ended on the 6th of March. The jury had been out for 40 minutes. Nathaniel Vane, Duke of Ashworth, was to be hanged at Norwich Castle on the 28th day of March, 1827. Clara read it 4 times. Then she folded it very small and put it under the mattress, and sat down on the edge of the bed, and found that there was nothing left in her at all. 19 days. No evidence, no witness, no statement, no notebook, no magistrate, no name of a chemist, a father who had signed her away, a guardian who owned her body and her keeping and had every legal right to move her anywhere in England, and no reason on earth to let her live past the day the Duke died. And a bottle buried 9 inches deep in a garden 80 miles away that she could not reach, could not prove, and could not have carried into any court in England as anything but a madwoman's bottle. She did not cry. She had stopped being able to. She sat there until the light went, and then she lay down in her clothes, and sometime in the small hours she heard the boards outside give under a weight. Clara sat up. The step did not come to the door properly. It stopped short of it. She could hear breathing, close, and the small sound of a hand going flat against wood. Then a whisper, so low she had to hold her own breath to catch it. "Girl, are you awake?" "Mrs. Pike." "Don't get up, don't light anything." "What is it?" "Hush." There was a long pause. Clara heard the old woman's breath catch and go ragged, the way it does when somebody is fighting themselves. "I've been 6 years in that man's service," Mrs. Pike said. "I carried the tray to Isabel with my own 2 hands. I've told myself every day since that I never knew, and I did know, and I said nothing because I was 60 and I'd nowhere to go." "Mrs. Pike." "Now you listen." Her voice steadied. "That fire at the clerk's office in January. My sister's boy is a porter in that building. He was the one sent up to clear the room after." Clara's heart began, very slowly, to beat again. "He said the whole bundle went, every paper in it burnt to a cake. Then he said there was 1 leaf come loose and blown under the press, and he found it a week after when they shifted the furniture, and it was scorched at one end, and he thought nothing of it and put it in his pocket because it had a great deal of writing on it, and the paper was good." Something slid under the door. Clara heard it come across the boards and stop against her foot in the dark, and she went down onto her knees and put her hand flat on it. Paper, old, soft paper, crumbling along one edge where the burn had eaten into it. "He's not clever, my sister's boy," Mrs. Pike whispered. "He never read it. He's had it in a coat for 8 weeks. Clara could not speak. "Don't light a candle till I'm down the stairs," said Mrs. Pike. "And God be good to you, girl, because I've no more to give." The footsteps went away. Clara knelt on the floor of the attic in the pitch dark, with both hands pressed flat on that page for a long, long time. Then she got up and found the tinderbox and struck a light. The page was burnt away at the top. Half of it was gone, the whole beginning. The I. Anne Hale of Renford, being of sound mind, all of it eaten into a black crumbling edge that came away on Clara's fingers. But fire burns upward, and her mother had written her addition at the very bottom. Clara held it to the candle with both hands. Which was Mr. J. Vane, at Fenchurch Street in London. The bill was headed Hollies and Son, chemists of Bishopsgate. And on the same bill was writ, in a hand not the chemist's, to be continued at the same strength until the account is closed. Anne Hale, her mark witnessed by Jos Barrow, curate of this parish, 1811. Clara sat down on the floor of the attic. Hollies and Son, Bishopsgate. She had asked the commission for a name and had not had one, and it had been in her hands the whole time, and she had never once thought to write it down. She looked up at the little window. 19 days had become 17. Mrs. Pike came at 7 with the tray and did not look at her. Under the bread was a handkerchief, knotted at the corners, heavy. Clara opened it. £11 4 shillings in coin, some of it worn nearly smooth. It was the saving of a lifetime, and it had been kept in a tin somewhere and counted, Clara knew, a great many times. "Mrs. Pike, eat your breakfast. This is everything you have. I'm 61 years old and I've nowhere to spend it." The old woman set the water down. "I've served that family since I was 19. I carried the tray up to Isabel." She straightened. "You'll not shame me by giving it back." She went to the door, then she stopped. "The ivy on the west corner will hold a cat," she said to the door frame. "It might hold a girl who's not eaten proper in 3 months. I couldn't say." The key turned. Clara went out of the window at 2 in the morning, on the 11th of March. She would not have fitted in November. That was the truth of it, and it made her laugh out loud in the dark in a way that frightened her. She had been so careful for so long, sealed bread and sealed water, and nothing from any hand but one. And the very thing that had kept her alive had worn her down thin enough to pass through a 9-inch gap. The roof was frozen. She went along the gutter on her hands and knees for 30 feet, and the ivy took her weight at the west corner, and it tore away from the wall in a great slow rush when she was 6 feet from the ground and dropped her into the flower bed. She lay there a moment, winded, looking up at the black bulk of Ashworth Hall. Then she got up and started walking west. She reached Renford on the 14th. Her father was living in the back room of the Wheatsheaf, sweeping the yard for his keep. He came out with the broom in his hand and saw his daughter standing in the road in a torn gown with her hair down her back and mud to the knee, and he made a sound Clara had never heard a man make. "They said you were. I know what they said. They said you were took bad. They said you were being cared for." "Papa," she took hold of his arms, "what did you sign?" He stared at her. "It was for your keep." The gentleman read it out. He said it was for your keep and a fire and a woman to sit with you. "Can you read it?" "You know I can't." "Then listen to me now." Clara's voice cracked and she pushed on through it. "You signed me over to the man who is killing this whole story. You gave him my body and my keeping and the right to move me anywhere in England. He has 3 women in the ground and he will have me in the ground by April, and you put your mark on it." Thomas Hale went the color of the wall behind him. "Clara, I'm not saying it to punish you." She was shaking. "I'm saying it because you're coming with me to Norwich to say it in front of a judge, and there isn't time for you to be sorry. Be sorry after." He put the broom down against the wall. "Where first?" he said. They dug the bottle up out of her mother's floor at dusk. It was exactly where she had put it, 9 inches down in ground that had already been searched by a man with a spade and a lantern, and every reason in the world to be thorough. Clara scraped the earth off the linen with her thumbnails. Dark green glass, a third full, wax over the cork unbroken. Her father stood in the doorway of his wife's bedroom, looking at the boards stacked against the wall. 16 years, he said, in my own house. She was protecting us. She was protecting us on her own. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, and I never once asked her what ailed her. I thought she'd gone strange after the fever. I used to laugh at her for the door. Clara wrapped the bottle and put it inside her dress. Papa, lie. How much money have you? 6 shillings. That'll do, said Clara. We're going to London. Hollies and Son had stood in Bishopsgate for 90 years. It was a narrow, dim, beautiful shop that smelled of camphor and orange peel, with 1,000 drawers going up to the ceiling and a brass scale on the counter worn to the color of gold. The chemist was a Mr. Peter Hollies, aged about 45, in a green apron. He listened to Clara for 6 minutes without interrupting once. Then he took off his spectacles and polished them on the apron and did not put them back on. Miss Hale, he said, I am going to have to sit down. Sir. There is a standing order in my father's ledger that I have filled 4 times a year since I was 22. Fowler's solution at strength, quarterly, delivered to a physician in Norfolk. His hands had gone unsteady. It is a perfectly proper preparation. It is prescribed in half the houses in England for the ague, and for the skin, and for the nerves, and my father filled it before me for years. And who is billed? An account in Fenchurch Street. He looked up. Miss Hale, I have read about a duke in Norfolk in every newspaper in London for a month. I have read it at this counter, and I never once. He stopped. Show me the ledger, said Clara. It was a great calf-bound book, and it went back to 1802, and Peter Hollis laid it open on the counter and turned the pages himself because his boy had gone home. There it was. Vane J. Fenchurchson, Fowler's Soul, QTRLY, to Dr. E. Merrick, Ashworth, Norfolk. Every quarter, every single quarter for 17 years, in 3 different clerks' hands, an unbroken line of small brown entries marching down the years like fence posts. Clara put her finger on the page. Mr. Hollis, your accounts are signed for on delivery. Always. By whom? By the party billed or his agent. Show me 1815. He turned the pages. There it was, J&O. Vane in a hard old-fashioned hand quarter after quarter for years. And then in the September of 1815, the hand stopped. And in the December of 1815, a new hand began, younger, looser, fashionable, with a long, confident sweep on the tail of the V. J. Vane. Clara stared at it until the letters swam. His father died in the March of that year, she said. That is his son's hand. That is Julian Vane's hand, and it is on this book 17 times a year apart, and the last of them. She turned the page herself. The last entry was dated the 2nd of February, 1827. It was not for Norfolk. Vane J. Fowler's Soul, at strength, to be forwarded Dr. E. Merrick, care of Bell's Asylum, Halifax, Yorkshire, to be continued at the same strength until the account is closed. Clara's father, who could not read a word of it, saw his daughter's face and caught her by the elbow. What is it, girl, what does it say? It says he has already ordered mine, said Clara. There was no appeal in England in 1827. There was one road only. The judge who tried the case might grant a respite and report to the king in council, and Mr. Justice Anstruther was on the Norfolk circuit until the end of March, and he was at Norwich, and Nathaniel Vane was to be hanged there on the 28th. They reached Norwich on the 26th with Peter Hollis, his ledger in a locked box on his knees, and a clerk from Bishopsgate who could swear to the hand. Mr. Justice Anstruther read for 40 minutes without speaking. Then he said, "Bring me the sheriff." The hearing opened at 10 o'clock on the morning of the 27th of March, in the great hall at Norwich Castle, with the gallows already standing in the yard outside. Clara had never seen so many people in one room in her life. The gallery was packed to the walls. There were women who had come 11 miles in a cart to watch a duke hang, and had found themselves watching this instead. They brought the duke up from below at 10 minutes past 10. Clara had not seen him for 6 weeks. He came up the stair between 2 turnkeys, and he was in the clothes he had been arrested in, and he had gone so thin that the coat hung off him like something on a peg. His hair had been cut short for the rope. There was a gray cast to his skin that she knew, now, exactly how to read. He came up expecting to be told the hour. He got to the top of the stair, and he looked out over that hall, and he saw a farmer's daughter in a borrowed gown, standing at the table with a green glass bottle in front of her. Clara watched his face come apart. He said her name, not loudly. It carried anyway, all the way to the back, in a room of 400 people that had gone completely silent. "Sit down, Your Grace," said the judge. Dr. Merrick was called at 11:20. He came forward the same as ever, the good coat, the silver hair, the kind, round, comfortable face, and he took the book in his hand and swore on it, and Clara saw that his fingers were perfectly steady. He was very good. He was good for nearly an hour. He was sorrowful about Anne Hale. He was sorrowful about the young lady, whose condition he had certified with the greatest reluctance in the world and would certify again. He agreed that he had received a quarterly preparation from Hollies and Son, and had administered it, as 10,000 physicians in England administered it, in good faith, in accordance with the practice of his profession. "On whose account was it billed?" said the judge. "His Grace's, my lord, or the estate's. I never inquired. A physician does not read his patient's bills." "Mr. Hollies, stand up. Read the entry for the December quarter of 1815. Peter Hollies read it out. "Read the name signed against it." "J. Vane, my lord." "Whose hand is that?" "Not the same hand as the entries before it, my lord. It is a younger hand, and it is on my book 17 times. The judge turned. "Dr. Merrick, did you know that the man paying for that preparation was not the man drinking it?" And Clara, who had watched that face over a teacup and been charmed by it, and had told herself for months that if she ever got him in front of a judge, she would see the moment it broke, got to watch it happen. It was not dramatic, that was the terrible thing. Dr. Merrick simply stopped speaking mid-breath, and stood there in the box with his hand still resting on the rail, and looked across the hall at Julian Vane sitting in the second row. He looked at him for perhaps 4 seconds. And Julian did not look back. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at the window. He looked at his own gloves and turned his hat over once in his hands with an expression of polite, distant concern, the expression of a gentleman waiting for a tiresome piece of business to conclude, and he did not look at the man in the box for 1 single second. Merrick made a small sound. "He is not going to help me," he said. "Doctor." 31 years. Merrick's voice had gone strange and high. "I lost a patient in 1806, a young woman. It was my error, and it was drink, and nobody ever knew but John Vane, because it was John Vane's tenant's daughter, and he came to me in the January, and he said, Merrick, we shall say no more about it, and by the by, my nephew has a delicate constitution." The hall had begun to make a noise. I gave him what he asked for. I told myself it was a proper physic. I have told myself that for 20 years, and I have never once believed it for an hour together. He was crying now, openly, this comfortable old man with his silver hair. And when the father died, I went to Fenchurch Street, and I told the son the arrangement was ended. And the son sat me down and gave me a glass of wine and said, "Dr. Merrick," the judge's voice cut like a blade, "what did he say?" "He said, my father kept a paper about you in the desk, and I have read it, and I think we shall go on exactly as we are." Merrick gripped the rail. "And then he said the arrangement wanted improving," he said. "He said an heir was the danger. He said we should have to attend to the wives." Clara did not see Julian move. She heard 400 people breathe in, and by the time she had turned her head, he was already at the end of his row and going fast for the side door, not running. That was the horror of it. He was walking, quickly and neatly, the way a man leaves a church. There were 2 constables at the main doors, and none at all at the side. The sheriff shouted. The gallery came to its feet in a roar that rolled around that stone hall like weather. Somebody knocked over a chair. The turnkeys were on the wrong side of the Duke and had to go round the table. Julian Vane got the side door open. And Thomas Hale, who had been standing against that wall all morning because there had been no seat for him, stepped into the gap and put both hands on the frame. Clara screamed at him. She heard herself do it. Her father did not move. He was 56 years old and half a foot shorter, and he had a broom-worn back and 6 shillings in the world. And he stood in that doorway with his arms out like a man penning a bullock. And he said, Clara heard it. She would swear to it in front of God, over the noise of 400 people. Not this one. The pistol was very small. It had been in Julian's coat all morning, and Clara understood later what it had been for. A man does not carry a pistol into a courtroom to shoot his way out of it. He put it against her father's chest and fired. The noise stopped. That is what Clara remembered. 400 people and one flat crack, and then the whole hall going quiet enough to hear the smoke. They had Julian on the floor before her father finished falling. Clara got to him somehow. She did not remember crossing the room. She was on the flags with his head in her lap, and her hands pressed down where her hands were no use at all, and Peter Hollis was on his knees beside her with his coat off, and somebody was calling for a surgeon in a voice that already knew. Her father's eyes found her. "Papa, Papa, look at me, look at me." His hand came up and took hold of her sleeve. £40, he said. Don't you dare." £40. He was trying very hard to say it properly. "I sold you for £40, Clara." "Papa." Was I quick enough? His eyes went past her, searching the ceiling. "Girl, was I quick enough this time?" And Clara Hale bent down over her father's face and said the truest thing she ever said in her life. "You were the fastest man in that room," she said. "You stopped him. Nobody else moved and you stopped him. Papa, you got there first." He said, "Ah." And that was all. Nathaniel Vane, Duke of Ashworth, was discharged at 4 o'clock that afternoon. There was no ceremony to it. Mr. Justice Anstruther directed that the conviction could not stand, granted a respite under his hand, ordered the whole of it to the King in council, and committed Julian Vane and Edward Merrick to the assize on 3 counts of willful murder, and one of murder committed in the face of the court. Then he closed his book and said, to nobody in particular, that he had sat on that bench for 22 years and had never come nearer to hanging an innocent man, and that he intended to think about it for the rest of his life. They opened the doors at 4. The yard was full. Word had gone round Norwich by 2 o'clock, and there were perhaps 2,000 people packed into that castle yard, standing on carts and on each other's shoulders, and the gallows still standing in the middle of them all because there had not been time to take it down. Clara came out into the light with her father's blood, dried black on her gown. She did not hear the noise the crowd made. She heard it afterwards in her sleep for years. The Duke came out behind her. He stopped at the top of the steps. He looked at the gallows and at the 2,000 people and at nothing at all for a moment. Then he came down and stood in front of her. Neither of them said anything for a long time. He was shaking. She could see it. 6 years of it and 6 weeks in a stone room and a rope that had been waiting for him since breakfast. "Your Grace." "Don't," his voice was almost gone. "Clara, don't call me that. It's your name." "It is the name of a man who bought a girl for £40 because he wanted a letter," he said. "I have thought about that in a cell for 6 weeks. I put you in that house. Every single thing that has happened to you and to him," he could not say it, "began with me deciding I was cleverer than the people who wrote to me." Clara looked at him. He was thin and gray and cropped for the rope, and he was, she thought, the most stubborn and most stupid and most impossible man in England, and he had gone into a privy floor up to his elbow at midnight without a word of complaint. "You'll want to be careful," she said. "You're about to make it about you again." The Duke of Ashworth stared at her. And then in the yard at Norwich Castle, under a gallows, in front of 2,000 people, he laughed. It came out cracked and wrong, and it turned into something else halfway through, and he put his hand over his face and stood there for a moment. Clara waited. When he took his hand down, he held it out to her instead. "Come home," he said, "please." Clara looked at his hand. It was still marked to the wrist, and it always would be. She took it. 1 year later, the 12th of December, 1828. The shutters at Ashworth Hall had been taken off their hinges and burnt. That had been Clara's doing in the first week, and she had done it herself with a crowbar and a great deal of temper while the servants watched from the lawn. The Duke had come out to ask what she thought she was doing, and she had handed him the other crowbar. Now the light came into that house from 6 in the morning until it went, and there was nothing in the world remarkable about that except to the people who had lived there before. The corridor in the west wing had been opened too. The planks came off, the rooms were swept, and the sick room where 3 women had died was now a nursery with a rocking horse in it, because Clara had said that you either give a room a new use or you leave it a shrine, and she would not have a shrine in her house. There had been a great deal of talk about that. There had been a great deal of talk about everything. The county had decided in the end that the new Duchess of Ashworth was very odd, and rather common, and probably the best thing that had happened to that family in 100 years. They were married in the June, quietly in the parish church, with 11 people present. Mrs. Pike had refused to sit in a pew until Clara went and fetched her out of the porch by the arm, and put her in the front row on the bride's side, where there was nobody else, and told her that a woman who gives away every penny she owns has bought the right to sit down. She was the housekeeper still. She had tried to resign 4 times. "You don't want me in this house. I want you in this house more than I want the house." I carried the tray to Isabel. "And you knocked the cup out of my hand," Clara said, "and you gave me 11 pounds and 4 shillings, and you told me about the ivy. Mrs. Pike, I am not going to argue with you every March for the rest of our lives." "You will," said Mrs. Pike. She was right, they did. The trial at the summer assize took 4 days. Edward Merrick pleaded guilty on the first morning and gave evidence for 2 days against his employer, and his evidence hanged them both. He asked to be allowed to say something before sentence and was permitted, and what he said was that he had been a good doctor for 31 years and a murderer for 20 of them, and that he had never worked out how both of those things could be true at once, and that he supposed the jury would be able to manage it. Julian Vane said nothing at all until the very end. He was asked whether he had anything to say why sentence should not be passed, and he stood up in a clean coat with his hair brushed, and he looked across the court at his cousin, and he said, "You were meant to die at 11 years old. My father used to tell me that at breakfast. He would say, 'The sickly boy stands between you and everything, Julian, and God will see to him in his own time.' And then God did not, and God did not, and God did not, and there was a great deal of money going into that house every year and none of it coming to us." He put his hands behind his back. "I did not decide to do it," he said. "That is what none of you will ever understand. I was 21 and I opened a desk and it was already happening, and all I had to do to be a rich man was nothing at all. It took me 11 years to work out that nothing is a thing you do." He was asked again whether he had anything to say. "Only that I loved Isabel," he said. "You may put that in the papers. It happens to be true and it makes it worse, and I should like it to be worse." They were hanged together at Norwich on the 29th of August. Clara did not go, and neither did her husband. They were at home on that morning, planting a walnut tree in the kitchen garden, because it was the only thing either of them could think of to do with a day like that. The arsenic did not leave him. That was the thing nobody in the newspapers had wanted to print, because it spoiled the shape of the story. 6 years of it does not come out because a jury says so. His hands shook in the mornings. He tired by 4 o'clock. He walked with a stick in the winter and would not use it in front of company out of vanity, and Clara let him have that one. But the marks on his forearms faded from gray-brown to something nearer silver, and the white bands grew out from under his fingernails month by month. And one afternoon in the spring, Clara came into the yellow drawing room and found him asleep in a chair in the sun with his mouth open and his stick on the floor. And she stood in the doorway and cried for about 4 minutes quietly, and then went away and did not mention it. He ate at his own table now. He had had to be taught. For the first 3 months he still cut his own meat and drew his own water and inspected every dish that came to him, and Clara said nothing whatever about it, because she did exactly the same and they both knew it. It went, in the end, the way frost goes. Not on any particular morning, but one day you notice it has been gone a while. She caught him at it in the August. Mrs. Fenn put a plate in front of him. Mrs. Fenn had come back within a fortnight of the trial, and had extracted an apology and a rise, and he picked up his fork and ate what was on it while reading a letter about drainage, and did not look at the plate once. Clara looked at her hands and thought, "There, that's it. That's the whole of it, that's what all of this was for," and said nothing at all. Their daughter was born on the 2nd of November, 1828, and there was no difficulty about her name. Anne. She was, according to Mrs. Fenn, the loudest infant ever born in the county of Norfolk, and according to Mrs. Pike she had her mother's chin and would be trouble, and according to her father she was perfect and the discussion was closed. He held her for the first 4 hours and would not put her down, and when Clara woke and asked him what on earth he thought he was doing, he said that he had never in his life expected to hold anything he had not already worked out how to lose, and that he would be finished shortly. There were 4 portraits in the long gallery now. Margaret with her little gray dog, Sophia half-turned at the piano, laughing at something outside the frame, Isabel in the garden with her hands folded and her mouth turned down at one corner, and at the end, newly hung, Clara, who had refused to sit for it 3 times and had finally submitted on the condition that she be painted in the plain gray wool she actually wore, and not in silk she had never owned. Their headstones had been recut in the spring, all 3 of them. The old ones had said only their names and their dates in the way of that family, and the new ones said what had actually happened to them, in plain English, because Clara had gone to the mason herself and dictated it. The county had thought this was in extremely poor taste. The county had been informed that the Duchess of Ashworth did not much care. On the 12th of December, they gave a dinner. That had been Clara's idea too, and she had held out against the whole household to get it, including her husband, who had gone gray around the mouth when she first said it. Not that day. Especially that day. Clara. Nathaniel, it is a day in December. It comes round every year whether we sit in the dark or not. She had put both hands flat on his chest. They have had that date for 6 years. I am taking it off them. So there were 40 people in the dining room, and every candle in the house was lit, and it was the first dinner given at Ashworth Hall since 1820. It was a very strange party. Peter Hollis came up from Bishopsgate and got into an argument about turnips with the vicar that lasted 2 hours. Betsy, who was head housemaid now and 19, dropped a tureen and was told by the Duchess in front of everybody that the tureen had been ugly. Mrs. Pike stood behind Clara's chair all evening and refused to sit, out of principle, and drank 2 glasses of wine standing up. It was during the dessert that the Colonel's wife, a well-meaning woman from Aylsham who had been talking loudly all night about how dreadfully brave it all was, noticed the frame over the fireplace. It was a good frame, gilt, glazed, the sort of thing that holds a commission or a letter from a king. Inside it was a strip of dirty paper about 4 inches long, with a fold across the middle and a ring mark from a wet glass in one corner. There were 11 words on it in bad handwriting and a smudged signature at the bottom. "Your Grace, forgive me, but what is that?" The table went quiet in the way tables do. Clara turned round in her chair and looked at it. "That's the note of hand my father signed at the Wheatsheaf in Renford," she said. "For £40. It's what he lost me for." The colonel's wife put down her spoon. "But my dear," she said, "why on earth would you keep such a thing in the dining room?" And Clara Vane, Duchess of Ashworth, who had scrubbed that kitchen table below stairs and had gone out of an attic window on a rope of ivy, and had held her father's head in her lap on a courtroom floor, smiled at her across 40 feet of silver and candlelight. "Because it's the worst thing that ever happened to me," she said. She looked down the length of the table. Her husband was at the other end of it with his stick hooked over the arm of his chair, watching her with an expression that the colonel's wife would describe to 11 separate people over the following month. "And it's how I got here," said Clara. Upstairs, in a room in the west wing that had been sealed with nails for 6 years and now had a rocking horse in it, Anne Vane slept through the entire thing. Below her, the fiddler started up, and 40 people got out of their chairs, and somebody threw the long windows open to let the cold in, and the light from Ashworth Hall went out across the gardens and the wild lawn and all the way down to the chapel wall, where 4 names were cut into 3 stones, and every one of them, at last, told the truth. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.